Wonderhussy here, standing at the side of Interstate 15 at the Liberty Sculpture Park. Okay, you might be familiar with the Liberty Sculpture Park if you've ever driven down I-15 from Los Angeles or Las Vegas. Right down the street from the giant fake ice cream cone at Eddie World, it's that weird sculpture park with the giant number 64 and the sculpture of the infamous man who faced down the tank in the Tiananmen Square protest back in 1989. I think it was 1989. Anyway, it's basically a sculpture park full of sculptures dedicated to liberty. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, well, you probably remember I've made not one, but two videos here. The first time I came here, I was just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And then the second time I came here, I actually met the artist himself, who was here because of this particular art piece. Okay, you can see it's a giant head. Well, it's a skull on one side, and it still has the flesh on the other side. And then there's kind of like little coronavirus tentacles coming out the top of it, and it says CCP virus 2. And if you haven't watched my other videos, well, you're probably wondering what the heck that's all about. Well, CCP virus stands for Chinese Communist Party virus 2, because the original sculpture he built showing, I guess this is supposed to make some point about how the Chinese government covered up the coronavirus epidemic when it first started, and there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about how that virus got started, and I won't go into that here. This particular artist had a sculpture that my interpretation of it was he was sort of blaming the Chinese government for covering it up. Well, someone came out here and burned down the original sculpture. Okay, that's CCP virus 2, because CCP virus 1, which is still here, I didn't realize, he didn't get rid of it. He left it here, all charred and burned by, well, when I came here to film my second video, which was all about this sculpture being burned, the artist himself happened to be here, and I interviewed him in my video, and you can go back and watch that, and he claimed that somebody from the Chinese government actually came out and set fire to that statue because they were mad at him for exposing the truth. And at the time I kind of thought, well, that sure sounds wacky. The Chinese government is going to send an operative way out here to little old Yermo, California, on the highway between Las Vegas and Barstow? I don't think so. But since doing that interview, I saw some news stories from reputable sources that kind of confirmed it. Or if not totally confirmed it, I feel like at least confirmed that the FBI was investigating the possibility that representatives of the Chinese Communist government did come out here to Yermo and set fire to the original sculpture. And I don't know if they ever conclusively proved anything, whether or not it actually was the Chinese government or whether it was somebody else. But one thing's for sure, the artist doesn't give up easy. He came out and built another one, and that's why this is CCP virus 2. Now, since I made those videos, there's been a lot of new artwork added here at the Liberty Sculpture Park. This guy doesn't just sit around twiddling his thumbs. He's busy. Like, he did this one of a giant wave, which I think is representing some terrible flood that happened. And then it looks like he's got another one going in here that looks like the Statue of Liberty's hand holding the torch. I mean, at least I think that's what that is. It's still packed up in this scaffolding. I guess it hasn't been erected yet, but isn't that what that is? A giant hand holding a torch. Looks like the Statue of Liberty to me. And that would fit right in with the theme of the Liberty Sculpture Park. And then there's this giant hammer and sickle, which, well, at first glimpse, if you're just speeding past on the highway, you might go, what the hell is this goddamn commie stuff doing at the side of my highway? But if you were to actually pull off the highway and take a closer look, well, you'd see that this is actually an anti-communist statement, as evidenced by the fake blood spatters on the hammer and sickle, and the fact that it's resting on a mound of skulls. Pretty obviously not an endorsement of communism, but nuance is lost on a lot of people, which is probably partly why they have the danger do not enter signs posted around the perimeter. I guess they're trying to keep people from getting in and blowing this piece up like they did the CCP virus. Now, I learned something last night that made me doubt again that the Chinese Communist Party or the Chinese government had anything to do with burning that other sculpture. And that something I saw isn't far from here. And it's really weird and really interesting. So let's get in the car and go check that out, and I'll tell you my theory. Okay, I happen to be randomly driving around this totally random back street last night with a friend of mine, and he took me to some weird things he'd discovered while driving around this part of the country, and one of them was this. That's right, it's a giant chrome bust of Vladimir Lenin. Not John Lennon, Vlad Lenin. Remember the Russian Revolution, 1917? They killed the Tsar and his wife and all his daughters, except maybe Anastasia might have escaped. That Vladimir Lenin? Well, if you're anything like me, you might be wondering what on God's green earth a giant chrome bust of Vladimir Lenin is doing way out here in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert, halfway between Las Vegas and Barstow. Well, fortunately for you and me, the answer was pretty easy to find out by doing a little Googling. So come to find out, this bust of Lenin was actually part of a giant artwork by these two Chinese brothers. Okay, I guess they're these two Chinese brothers that do kind of subversive sculptures, kind of poking fun at Chairman Mao, the guy who started the Chinese Communist Party, and I guess kind of poking fun at the Chinese Communist Party altogether. Okay, they're called the Gao brothers, and as you can imagine, their art isn't too popular in China. Now I know you're probably wondering, well, what does Vladimir Lenin have to do with China? Well, Vladimir Lenin founded the Communist Party in Russia, and China is a communist country to this day. So apparently, well, if you notice, this statue has kind of a flat head. And when my friend took me here last night and I first saw this thing, I thought, oh, well, it kind of looks like a giant plant pot, you know, something you'd buy at a fancy garden center. You know, something you'd pay big bucks for at some fancy artsy-fartsy garden center and then plant a bunch of cactus in it so it looked like he was growing hair. Kind of like a chia pet. Chia. Remember those commercials? Anyway, I personally can't think of anything much cooler than a giant chrome Vladimir Lenin head with cactus growing out the top at the front of my Death Valley compound. So at first I was like, well, salute to whatever kooky artist got this thing and had it installed out here. But come to find out, this thing actually has a really interesting and highly politicized history. Okay, so when the Gao brothers first sculpted this thing, I'm not sure what you would say. I think it's made out of polished steel, so you don't really sculpt steel. Whatever. When the Gao brothers made this thing, originally there was a little piece on top, like a little curved piece, the rest of his head, and there was a little feminized Chairman Mao standing on top of it, holding one of those, you know, those long poles that like a tightrope walker carries to help them balance, like da 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 da. Well, I guess there was a little tiny Chairman Mao. I think he might have even been wearing a tutu, carrying this long balancing pole, standing on top of his head. And I guess it was meant to be like a statement of the balancing act that Chairman Mao was doing, trying to keep China in line with communist principles. I'm not really sure what the meaning behind it was supposed to be, and isn't that always the case with art? Sometimes it's really hard to tell what the hell these artists mean, but one thing's for sure, it was definitely meant to be an anti-communist piece of Chinese art. It was not meant to be an endorsement of Vladimir Lenin, the Communist Party, and certainly not of Chairman Mao. Well, unfortunately, like I said back at the Liberty Sculpture Park, nuance is lost on most people. And so when this thing was exhibited, okay, I guess it was first shown at the Vancouver Biennale, like some fancy art show up in Vancouver. And then it was purchased by a real estate developer, art collector down in San Antonio. And he had this sculpture trucked all the way down and displayed in downtown San Antonio. A statue of Vladimir Lenin with Chairman Mao balancing on his head in San Antonio? Woo-wee! I don't need to tell you, but this kind of commie crap might fly in Vancouver, but it sure ain't gonna go over well deep in the heart of Texas. And, well, sure enough, it wasn't long before there was all kind of complaints about, why are we displaying this piece of communist propaganda right in the middle of downtown San Antonio? Well, I guess it was in kind of an artsy, funky industrial area. And so all the artsy folk and the folk who understand nuance and who understood the point of the piece got it just fine. But, you know, most red-blooded, steak-eating, corn-fed Texans were absolutely outraged. And in fact, it wasn't long before the sculpture was badly vandalized, which I think is why you don't see Chairman Mao dancing on top of his head anymore. Okay, I guess what happened was, technically it wasn't a Texan that vandalized this, it was a dude from Florida. This guy from Florida drove 850 miles. He rented a car and drove 850 miles through the night to San Antonio and tried to blow this thing up. I guess there was a fence around it or something. I don't know. He packed a bunch of explosives around the base, and then he backed up and fired a rifle into the explosives. And, well, obviously he didn't blow it up, because you can see there aren't really any burn marks or scuff marks. And, in fact, the steel looks just as shiny today as the day it was minted by the Gao brothers. But apparently it was damaged enough to blow Chairman Mao off the top. And, I don't know. It was damaged enough to where I guess it wasn't worth anything anymore. Maybe the guy who bought it had it insured. He probably had it insured. So he got his insurance money, and I'm not sure how it ended up out here. But the guy who blew it up didn't stop there. I think, something like 9 months later, he rented another car and drove 930 miles up to Washington, D.C., where he tried to blow up the Chinese embassy. That's right, he got a bunch of bags full of explosives, and I guess he leaned them up against the back wall of the embassy, and then he was trying to fire into them from across the street or somewhere, but he kept missing. And before he was finally able to hit the bag and blow the building up, well, he was apprehended by the law, and I'm pretty sure he's still in jail to this day. Now, I'm not sure about this part, but he had a Hispanic name. I want to say his name was Christopher Rodriguez, and he was from Florida, so that makes me think he might have been Cuban. There's a lot of Cubans in Florida, and, well, a lot of Cubans are really down on the Communist Party because Cuba still is a communist country, and, well, they're pretty upset about that. At least the Cubans who managed to get to the United States are pretty upset about that. So my hunch is, or my theory is, that this guy drove all the way 850 miles to San Antonio just to blow this thing up because he thought it was an endorsement of communism. And that's why I say that nuance is lost on most people, including possibly whoever vandalized that CCP virus statue. You know, it could have just been some big rig trucker, you know, doing the route back and forth from Vegas to LA. And every time he drove by that sculpture park, he'd see all these hammer and sickles, and he'd get madder and madder, okay? You know, maybe his brother was a Vietnam vet, or his dad was a Vietnam vet, or he just knew a lot of NAM vets from hanging out at the VFW, and boy, it just really got his blood boiling and steam coming out his ears. You know, he might have been listening to a little AM talk radio as he was trucking along, and one day he finally had enough. Say he'd just dropped off his trailer, so he was bobtailing it. You know, he had a light and easy load, so he pulled off. He decided, this is it, man. This is it. I'm taking my revenge. And so maybe, just maybe, he blew that CCP virus statue up, just like the guy tried to do to this bust of Vladimir Lenin. It's just a theory, but one thing's for sure. This is 100% not supposed to be an endorsement of anything to do with communism. And I know that even doubly so, not just because of my research about the Gao brothers and, their anti-communist party stance, but also because I looked up this address and it's affiliated with the Liberty Sculpture Park. I think somebody told me that the guy who makes all those sculptures in the Liberty Sculpture Park has a foundry out in this area. And so I think this might be where that foundry is. I mean, it's a huge property and it's a beautiful property. He has cameras pointing at the gate. Hopefully nobody comes out here and yells at me. I'm not going to trespass. I just want to show you. Well, first of all, the glory of the setting desert sun on the face of Vladimir Lenin. I don't know. Is that messed up to want this to be a chia pet? I mean, I think this would look absolutely amazing at the foot of my driveway. And, with cactus growing out of the top of it, it could hardly be seen as an endorsement of communism. But then, you never know, I might just end up getting my house firebombed by some angry trucker or somebody else similarly lacking an understanding or any sort of nuance. I'm trying to get a good angle here because there's this big lake back here, which I thought we could see from this angle, but I guess not. Anyway, my point is this is just a really big, beautiful property. It's got a lake on it, which you might think, what? A lake in the middle of the desert between Vegas and Barstow? Well, yes, I do mean a lake in the desert between Las Vegas and Barstow because this part of the desert that I'm in is weirdly full of lakes. I actually stayed at a friend's house last night that's in a gated community around a lake. There's a whole bunch of lakes out here. Oh my God. It's absolutely beautiful out here right now. Hang on. Sorry, Vlad. Gotta run across the street for a minute and film this gorgeous desert sunset. Oh my God, the sun is going down in the west and it's lighting up this beautiful desert plain and the mountains in this gorgeous golden buttery light and this dirt road stretching out before us leading to God knows what. No telling what kind of giant polished steel busts are down that road. No telling what's down that road. No telling what's down any of these roads. There is so much weird shit in this particular corner of the desert that this giant bust of Vladimir Lenin isn't really that out of place. Which I know sounds absolutely bizarre, but it's true. I think this is my new favorite neighborhood in the Mojave Desert. And I'm not kidding. I told you I stayed at my friend's house last night and I took a shower and washed my hair using the water from his well. And it was 1,000 times better than the water from my well. So, maybe I ought to see if I can get a spread with a lake of my own out here. But even if I did, there's only one giant polished steel head of Vladimir Lenin. So my place couldn't possibly ever even be half as cool as this spread. Okay, I know, maybe I'm weird, but I love absurdity, absurdism, surreality. And if this isn't surreal and absurd, well, I don't know what is. And it's stuff like this that keeps me patrolling the back roads of the Mojave Desert, always exploring, always on the lookout for more weird, quirky, and unusual things, of which I'm sure there are many more just waiting for me to discover. So stay tuned for many more videos to come.